Paterson is about a bus driver and aspiring poet named Paterson who lives and works in the city of Paterson, New Jersey. Yes, the main character and the city share the same name. His life revolves around a very simple routine. He wakes up early in the morning, has a bowl of cereal, walks to work, writes poetry into his notebook, has a casual chat with his boss before he begins his shift driving a bus, observes the city and overhears fragments of conversations on the bus, walks back home, eats dinner and talks with his lovely wife, takes their dog out for a walk, stops in a bar and drinks exactly one beer each evening, chats with some of the other customers and especially with the bartender/owner of the place who is known to collect Paterson memorabilia, and goes back home to bed only to repeat it all over again the next day. He seems mostly at peace with his repetitive lifestyle. By contrast, his wife Laura's world is ever changing. New dreams and ambitions seem to come to her all the time. Her most recent ones include learning the guitar and becoming a country music star, and opening a cupcake business. They love each other, they support each other, he supports her newfound ambitions and she supports his talents as a poet, constantly urging him to publish his poems or at least make copies of them, as he has never shown them to anyone else ever. What the hell kind of a movie is that, you ask? Well, it's a Jim Jarmusch movie, and Jim Jarmusch is a filmmaker I'm unfortunately ashamed to admit I'm not all that familiar with. A lot of my friends are big fans, and I'm really not surprised by it. This guy is truly one of the most original, unpretentious, modest, humble, self-conscious, authentic, tastefully funny, charming, likable, cool, pleasant, idiosyncratic, adventurous, uncompromising, fascinating, and fascinated by everything that is art, everything from poetry to rock and roll, a very mood and character development oriented director who has been quoted saying that he would rather make a movie about a guy walking his dog than about the Emperor of China, and who doesn't know where he fits in and doesn't feel tied by time, while others have been quoted of saying that he is unapologetically standing up for the idea of celebrating poetry and culture, and that he's like a cultural sponge who absorbs everything. Now, I don't know how intentional this might have been, but considering all of this, I think that Jarmusch just might have made his most personal, if not necessarily biographical film to date. I mean, a film about a guy walking his dog? Check. Standing up for poetry? Check. Being like a sponge, absorbing everything around you? Check, 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 check. Now, Paterson, our main character, is from around here. He has lived here all his life. He is very much rooted in the community, yet he seems to be simultaneously the most out-of-place person around. I mean, for a lot of reasons. He doesn't use or doesn't own a cell phone or a laptop or an iPad, for example. You know, the whole not being tied to time thing. He is very, shy and quiet. Of course, he has the ability and has the talent to be able to express himself through his poetry, but in just ordinary, regular, everyday conversations, he is, very soft-spoken, very, neutral, very down-to-earth. But of course, we as an audience who are permitted to enter, to be able to see more through his point of view, we do see that he absorbs and he perceives and he interprets so much more. During the movie, we see a period in Paterson's life that lasts for exactly 1 week, from Monday until Sunday. That's 7 days, and of course it shouldn't come as a surprise that while all of the days are basically identical, I mean, he does the same thing over and over again, as I said, all of the days differ as well. I mean, during a certain interval, during a certain day, something might happen that differs from what happens during all the rest of the days. Like during a day, for example, the bus breaks down. During an evening, he overhears and eavesdrops on a rapper in a laundry, played by Method Man, who's throwing down some sick rhymes. During an evening, he has a conversation with a group of dudes in a car who might be mistaken to be gangsters or thugs. And all of these events really start to make you ponder about what these events might actually lead to. It's very interesting that most of them don't actually lead anywhere. They just serve as mere curiosity for Paterson, as well as these other characters serving as merely being curious about Paterson. It's really cool that we are made to feel like we are in this character's skin. But the most interesting interaction in the film takes place when he is walking home from work and he meets this little girl who is waiting for her mother to pick her up. And she also happens to be a poet, and she is just absolutely fascinated and surprised that this bus driver could like poetry. And I thought it was very interesting because while the film doesn't talk about judging people, it's not a PC movie in the slightest, it does talk about this sort of tendency we have to make up opinions about people based solely on our initial impressions, and to think about people as being represented by a single solitary characteristic. I mean, this guy, he is a bus driver, so obviously that's the only thing he knows about, driving buses. How could he like poetry? And it all goes back to, again, to Jim Jarmusch, the director, who says that he is an American who oftentimes feels like a foreigner. Yeah, I completely understand that. It's People who are from your town viewing you as being peculiar when there's absolutely nothing out of the ordinary about you. I mean, why can't the bus driver like poetry the same way like a priest could like heavy metal? When Paterson is writing his poetry, we always see the words being literally spelled out across the screen, and we hear him reciting it as he is working on them. Oftentimes like repeating something, or stopping during a certain scene and continuing the same poem during the next scene, changing it up, replacing like parts of it, and he's always inspired by something, many times by something like so trivial that he just happened to come across during that day, like a box of matches, for example. Even though the film is about a very simple man's day-to-day life, nothing in the film ever feels random. Everything has its place because the film is deliberately constructed as a poem. It literally rhymes. There are doubles everywhere, just from the very fact that the main character shares his name with the town, to a conversation he has with his wife in which she is telling him about the dream she had with them having kids, being twins, to him literally starting to see twins everywhere, including the little poet girl he talks to, who also happens to be a twin. We see her twin sister coming out of the car when her mother eventually comes to pick her up, to the very fact that we see him observing the world while we are simultaneously observing it through him and observing him as well every step of the way during the process. The film is really about there being two sides to things, but not in like a very like traditional movie sense. No, here it becomes something much more repetitive and much more poetic, of course. It's not like there are like traditional setups and payoffs here. No, we see some things happening a single time, we see other things happening multiple times, but with no real outcome to them. There are like certain mini like subplots or episodes, or I don't even know what to call them. Like his boss, for example, constantly complaining about his family life, the bar owner being obsessed with collecting Paterson memorabilia, spending a lot of money on it, Paterson himself not being all that fond of the dog, and probably my favorite characters in the whole film. There is an ex-couple in the bar, a couple that just split up, and the girl is very chill about it, but the guy is just not willing to accept it. He is heartbroken and pissed off and is just not willing to leave this girl alone. And you know, all of these like plots have do reach some sort of boiling point, but there's no like real resolution to them, because when you really start to think about them, there's nothing really to resolve about them. And I just love the way those two characters were used, you know, the split up couple, because I feel that that's the way the movie is actually trying to mock the fact that there was no like real conflict for our main characters. You would expect that something would happen that would create difficulties in Paterson and Laura's relationship, but nothing actually really does. And I feel that those characters are used quite efficiently as a sort of comic relief to make fun of the fact that, dude, this is not that kind of movie. It really isn't. I just absolutely loved every single secondary character in this film. The actors are great. It might seem like the characters are pretty one-dimensional in the beginning, and while they don't do all that much to try and flesh them out, they do just the right amount to surprise you and to make you realize that, hey, there's more to each and every one of these people than initially meets the eye. You know, talking about the whole initial impressions thing I mentioned earlier. The two main characters, Paterson and Laura, are sort of this odd couple. They have very different personalities, but of course the opposites attract, for one, and for second, when he is asked about how come he doesn't have a cell phone or a laptop or an iPad when his girlfriend does and uses it all the time, he says that, yeah, she does, but she completely understands me. And when you really start to think about it, it's not so hard to understand why. These people are not so different as they would appear on the surface. Both of them are very complex human beings who are all about contrast. Now, in Paterson's case, it might be a little less apparent because, like I said, he is shy, he is quiet, he is soft-spoken on the surface, but we realize that underneath he is very much aware and he is very expressive, but it doesn't really show that much because he's more of an introvert. In Laura's case, on the other hand, her being more of an extrovert, her contrasts are much more apparent. I mean, she simultaneously wants to become a musician and make cupcakes. I mean, how the fuck does that even work? One requires you to be on the road, touring all the time, the other requires you to stay in one place all the time. And she's very interesting because colors like black and white are literally an element in the movie and an element of the character. From the color of the guitar she purchases to the cupcakes she is making. She is literally the type of character who easily gets inspired and just wants a piece of everything, wants to dip her toe and to dabble in anything and everything. He is less impulsive, more observant, and mainly inspired by the world that's literally around him, that surrounds him. She, on the other hand, is a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more all over the place, mainly inspired by either her own self or by stuff that are not part of her surroundings at all. I mean, the whole reason she picks up the guitar is because she says that she saw some video on television or on YouTube or something like that. And surprisingly enough, it is actually Laura, his wife, who is basically the most dynamic character here. I mean, like I said, she finds excitement in new activities, she likes exploring exploring uncharted territory, unlike all the rest of the people in Paterson's life. And in a way, it's like actually no wonder how he could fall in love with her. These two are basically like the perfect couple. They complement each other perfectly. His calmness and very introspective and serious nature really complements her very hyperactive and curious and childlike demeanor. And that probably sounds like a million times more corny and cheesy and schmaltzy than it actually is in the film. Trust me, the film really doesn't sugarcoat it, really doesn't try to linger on this romantic aspect for too long, just as it doesn't try to linger on any aspect or any element of the film for too long. This film is about not much, but I truly believe that ultimately it is about everything, actually. It is about life. It is about living life. It is about taking it all in, and it is about finding inspiration in all of its smallest, like, details and all of its aspects. Just goes to show you how the most mundane story can be so incredibly fucking life-affirming and inspiring if just told in the right way. And Jim Jarmusch knows how to tell this sort of story the right way. Probably the only one who does. This is the ultimate less is more movie. It's so incredibly fucking inspiring and heartwarming. Like, you guys know if you follow me that I don't have a rating system, but let's just say this one time I'm going to break my own rule and give Paterson a 10 out of 10. Man, this was perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about it. This hit all the marks for me. This is completely my cup of tea. Jim Jarmusch is a fucking genius. Adam Driver is a fucking genius. The greatest actor, one of the greatest actors of his generation by far, without a single doubt. I want to ask you guys, what is your favorite Jim Jarmusch movie? What would you recommend to someone who hasn't really seen most of his movies? I mean, I've only seen Dead Man and Coffee and Cigarettes and then this one. Oh, and Only Lovers Left Alive. I've seen that as well. Let's talk about Jim Jarmusch, people. Thanks for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can see you later with other reviews. And until then, folks, don't forget, stay cool, stay awesome, and goodbye.